is 10/28/2025, which would make it Bill Gates' birthday. Also the anniversary of the first Q drop, 10/28. Another thing, I guess it's the anniversary of the date that Elvis took the shot on the polio shot on the, was he on the Space Needle? No, but he took a polio shot on this date, 10/28/2025. So I was just putting up a new article I want to draw your attention to. The title of which is Hoax Indicators and the Informed Disbeliever. This is a Chromebook. It can't do very much. I just use it for writing. It's inadequate. I mean, it's actually so slow that my Grammarly doesn't pick up any of my spelling errors. So I had to update the blog. But if you're on my newsletter, you got this article this morning. It was prompted by someone who asked me for a list of hoax indicators. And I thought, we need to have a working list, and there's an explanation for why. So let's just go through it. The media skeptic doesn't automatically call reported news events fake. To refute a claim, one must have reasons to counter it. Reflexively calling something fake is the same error as automatically calling it true, which is why I can never agree when somebody says everything's fake or it's all fake. No, that's lacking nuance, and it's not a good argument. And we're here making arguments. We're taking stances that are defensible. And even if you're right 100% of the time, being right for the wrong reasons isn't good enough. Not anymore, because there are a lot of people who are right for the wrong reasons, and they drown us out. We're right for the right reasons, and I want to bring these up. The skeptical approach begins with the suspension of judgment while facts can be discovered. If I'm calling something staged, a simulated event, I'm doing so for one of two reasons. One, there's evidence of it being fake, or two, there are indicators of it being fake or likely fake. So if we can't prove it's fake, but there are hoax indicators, we can't give it a pass as real. Now, this is what you would consider to be reasonable doubt. So we should instead take the position of the informed disbeliever. This means we disbelieve because the additional information we have examined raises significant doubts as to the event's veracity. Those who do not suspend judgment, operating on the presumption the event was real, are led down whatever predictable narrative is doled out to them at regular doses over time. The news consumers are not being informed, but are rather being conformed to a pre-existing agenda. Seldom is there smoking gun evidence of an event being a hoax. Opinions are not strong arguments, and the entire point of a psychological operation is to deceive. Expecting it to be simple to expose as a fake is like expecting to go to a magic show where the magicians screw up his tricks enough for you to be able to see how they're performed. This is not a valid methodology for seeing through fake events. You can't say it looks fake to me, therefore it's fake. That's reason enough. No, it's actually not. And it may be for you, you may be right, but you're not right for the right reasons. Again, as video faking via generative AI improves, it will be increasingly difficult to rely solely on the visual elements to expose a staged event as such. So instead, we have to examine the wider media ecosystem for hoax indicators, such as 1, ready to implement political agendas. Real events tend not to have the problem, reaction, solution template attached. 2, crisis actors. Mass casualty simulations employ actors, as do simulated news events. These are characteristically exhibiting inappropriate emotions. Many are seemingly being coached in their testimony, and oftentimes their version of events are inconsistent with the official story. So for example, the witnesses at the CK event didn't really line up with what really happened. One of the persons they asked about it was smiling and giggling as she talked about the hole in Charlie's chest. and how it bled out, gushing, and he fell forward onto his face. Well, none of us saw that. So how are we supposed to rely on an eyewitness whose account widely varies from the official story? That's suggestive of somebody with a script. What's up, Can-A-Man? Here is your blue wrench. 3, relevant concurrent programming in contemporaneous entertainment media. So you have concurrently released mainstream entertainment that mirrors the event. This would indicate the event was scheduled to occur at that time and would therefore not be a spontaneous occurrence. So case in point, the CK event, you had the Hulu release on the day of that matched it, and the subsequent episodes where the widow took over the New Republicans mirrored Erica Widow's journey taking over TPUSA, and even being called into question as to whether or not she was involved or whether her grief was real. Yeah, that's right out of the TV show. So that means that the event itself would have been scheduled in advance, as was the TV show. That's not a spontaneously occurring event, just perfectly lining up. And if it's got any level of scripting, if it's scheduled in advance, well then obviously it's not real. Concurrent drills. Now this is a big one. A lot of the people who want to run to the it's all a coincidence explanation aren't able to explain how, in addition to having the entertainment propaganda mirroring it, the predictive and concurrent stuff, they have to explain the drills. How often do we see drills running alongside the event? Or, and the explanation used to be from Alex Jonestown, back when I was drinking the Kool-Aid there. The explanation was, it was a drill, and the drill went live. As if that makes any sense. The drill went live? Like, what does that even mean? They said that after the London bombing, because as the bombing was occurring, there were drills going on. And the bombings happened in the same places where they were doing literal bomb drills. The same exact tunnels. So again, can you write that off as coincidence? I don't think so. 5, celebrity involvement in an event is a good indicator it's an influence operation. This is a reoccurring theme. Celebrity involvement, celebrity endorsements, that's kind of an indicator. I mean, these are all things to be considered. Number 6, does the shooter reference other questionable shootings? So if you have a litany of fake shootings you've examined, and the latest shooter says, I was inspired by this guy and that guy, shout out to Adam Lanza, shout out to Nick Cruz, well then they exist in a fictional universe. Very similar to Marvel Comics, where it's like the real world, but you have all these additional characters that populate it, and they exist in the same universe so they can reference each other. That's what we're talking about. So if a shooter references other questionable shootings, and does the shooter fit a predictable stereotype targeted at striking fear into a target demographic? For example, the 4chan radicalized neo-Nazi shooters with bowl cuts frighten the political left. The right doesn't react to shootings unless the shooter's left-wing, non-binary, and targeting Christian schools. Like most Psyops, as we'll get into here, there's this interpretation where they both agree it's real, but they both blame the other. Thank you, Copaesthetic. He brought in 5 titanium blue wrenches. One goes to AJ206. One goes to Van Kiersblick, Elephant Tusks, Flatlander, Montgomery, and Evolvement. Just make sure you go out and check your front porch. It's a blue titanium wrench, should have a bow on it, has IPS etched into it. 7, deviations from standard protocol with law enforcement and emergency response personnel. If the crime scene is treated more like a movie scene, that should raise doubts. Like, no crime scene tape, no EMTs, they just throw the body in the back of an SUV like a sack of potatoes. Yeah, that's a deviation from standard protocol. Or they cement over the location of the shooting. It's like, if it's not a crime scene, then that makes sense, but this is an assassination. You think you'd want to know where the guy was sitting when he was shot, but no, they used the chair so one guy could grab the SD card out of a camera. talking about the CK thing. Number 8, does the event unfold according to a predictable template? The typical shooting hoax features a second shooter narrative, a copy pasta manifesto, predictable political agendas to be advanced, usually gun control and censorship. 9, the event triggers a perfectly bifurcated response to the left and right. As in, the left and right can agree it was real, but they each scapegoat the other side. So the left will say, oh, this was caused by toxic masculinity and gun culture. And the right will say, no, this was caused by rap music and SSRIs, which refers to like antidepressants, which again, doesn't make any sense, but for years, the talking point has been mass shootings are caused by antidepressants. This is projected, as something that was going to occur back in William Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse, where he said that mind-controlled assassins. And where does that mind control assassin theory come from? Manchurian Candidate, directed by John Frankenheimer. The guy whose movie predicted the JFK thing in many ways, was even brought up in that context because Oswald had seen it, but that was the director who drove Robert F. Kennedy to the Ambassador Hotel where he was killed by a mind-controlled assassin. 10, the story is given disproportionate attention, nationally or internationally. We have so many stories, so many shootings, so many things that don't get plastered on every single screen. So when one does, that should be looked at as somewhat questionable. Like, is this propaganda? 11, the public is goaded into participation with GoFundMe campaigns, hashtags, or activism with the introduction of martyrs and heroes. The martyrs will, of course, be villains to one side of the political spectrum, and the heroes will similarly appear as villains to the opposite side. For example, Luigi Mangione is a hero to the left and a villain to the right. Daniel Penny is a hero to the right and a villain to the left. And we talked about this the other day. It's kind of fascinating how one goes into jail, the other comes out. They fit into the class warfare thing. The subway is the scene of the Daniel Penny killing Jordan Neely, which all harkens back to Batman, because Marjorie Taylor Greene was talking about the city's like Gotham. We need Batman. We need vigilantes. So he was that vigilante. And of course, if you look at the subtext in the Joker Batman movies, there's this class warfare thing, kill the rich. The Joker represents the poor. He's in the subway. He's mentally ill. And he kills these rich guys and becomes a hero. So the subway symbolizes, in this case, the underclass. But what they do is they presented a class warrior, a hero to the left, who therefore is a villain to the right. But this is a repeated theme. Charlie Kirk is a martyr for the right, but to the left, he's a racist Nazi. George Floyd is a terrible man who put a gun to the belly of a pregnant woman and died of fentanyl. So he's deplorable to the right. But to the left, he's a victim of systemic racism. And his death revealed something that the nation needs to confront. So he's got this status of being a martyr to them. So the public being goaded into participation emotionally, financially, politically. Number 12, Scooby-Doo justice. The entire crime scene, terror attack, or mass shooting has a rapid resolution like an episode of a cartoon. The good guys unmask the bad guys at the end. For example, the media reports on the event, reads us the manifesto, and as judge, jury, and executioner, it brings us to the rapid conclusion as to the guilty party, who will then be tossed into a cell, never to be heard from again because they're crazy, or they will be conveniently killed during the event. Hoax indicators are what make the stories falsifiable. If these aren't taken seriously by the believers, if these aren't taken into account, then they're treating the reports as unfalsifiable, which means nothing can prove them false. Anybody treating mass media as unfalsifiable exists in a cult and aren't capable of honestly assessing facts. And therefore, they exist in the realm of subjective opinion. The burden of proof To accept what the media is reporting is not on the news consumer or skeptic. Any hoax indicator shifts the burden of proof further away from the news consumer. So unless a news believer can address and refute all of the hoax indicators, they don't actually have a truth claim. And when we're looking at these events, like the most recent one being the Charlie Kirk event, we have plenty of hoax indicators that have not been dealt with. So if your starting point is, I think he's dead, well, then you've accepted the argument from authority or appeal to authority that the media has built into it. But again, to accept it as real requires a leap of faith that the skeptic cannot justify. The best we can do is say, we know the story as presented, we have this additional information, and due to this, we can't co-sign on this. We're going to have to be in the position of informed disbeliever. And I think it's important to weigh the two. What's weightier, informed disbelief or low information belief based solely on faith? Well, informed disbelief actually weighs more. Thank you, Canaman. Appreciate the support. Putting gas in the tank, accelerant on the flames as we torch the world stage. It's all figurative, obviously. So we're not obliged to accept something as real based on an appeal to authority. If there are doubts raised by hoax indicators, you have to suspend disbelief indefinitely if warranted. And it doesn't mean that we're ignoring the story. It means that we know more about it, paradoxically, than the people who believe it. I mean, think about that. The people who believe the official version or even the conspiracy versions of what happened on September 10th know less than we do. And that's because they have an entire area of information they're ignoring, which is media fakery, Psyops, special effects. But they're within a closed informational system of mainstream and alternative media, an effective duopoly, so they're not really appraised of everything that we are. But we're not obliged to accept it. To accept it as real because you can't prove it as fake grants them, the media, an authority that it doesn't really deserve. And this is on account of well-documented instances of its mendacity. For as long as we've been following this as a think tank, we've observed consistent patterns of fakery, influence operations, psyops, and that's just scratching the surface. So we're not in the wrong for being skeptical of media, for not giving it the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't make us conspiracy theorists. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. As far as I'm concerned, the conspiracy theories that we hear about are all fake. The only real conspiracy is the successful one, which is the successful conspiracy to manufacture our history day by day. That fake news is being used to proactively create history. Time control. Finally, simulated events aren't anomalies. They're not occurring in a vacuum. The fakery we point out is systemic, and psychological operations are a standard practice. Empirical research bears this out. If you're not auto-hosting the mass media, you're not paying attention. So you got that newsletter. I have a few minor corrections to make in it. I'm using a Chromebook, and it's just really slow on the Grammarly app. So I type really fast, I work fast, and if my computer's slow, I usually have to go back and correct a couple minor things. But what I put in here basically are about a dozen hoax indicators. And if you're not willing to look at these hoax indicators, then your opinion on the matter is worthless. You're basically saying, evidence be damned. Evidence that contradicts the mainstream doesn't need to be discussed here. I'm just going to go with the screen. Well, if so, then it's not even your opinion. It's propaganda that you're carrying on behalf of Big Brother. Like, congratulations, you're a propaganda mule. You're a true believer in the world state church, the church of media. So the people who are taking the default position that you can trust the news as real unless they tell you it's fake, they're naive, they're gullible, they're brainwashed, but they're also advocating as media. They are the controlled opposition. And I wonder what makes people so willing to take that position. the same media that lied to you about every other event is lying to you today. It's not like it's a different set of conditions. If you saw through Butler, you should see through Charlie Kirk. I'm kind of surprised when people think the Charlie Kirk thing is real, but they can see all the rest of the stuff here. Another point that I have to kind of reiterate here is that the conspiracy theory version of the event is created, that it's engineered for the alt media. Like the guy who was a 9/11 witness who jumped up and said, I did it. That guy who was obviously planted. And then you had all these weird hand signs and suggestions of second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth shooters. How many shooters did Candace Owens identify? The shorter list is how many people did she scratch off that list? Because there was like 3,000 potential shooters and she's going through all of them. But at no point will she say, maybe he's not dead. So what they're doing, and this is a hoax indicator as well, they're applying a template. The template is the mainstream version of events, mainstream scapegoat, Antifa, and then the alternative, which always points to Israel. You wonder why conspiracy theorists are always being tarnished as being anti-Semitic, and a lot of them have good intentions and they don't see themselves that way. But that's because they don't understand that the entire red pill ideology is in fact a subset of woke right. It's a subset of the J pill. It's a subset of even what QAnon believes, which is a reiteration of blood libel. So it actually does lead to that scapegoat. Woke right, woke left each have their respective scapegoats, whiteness and Israel. And it's consistent across every single issue. That's how we knew on day one that this would be the ultimate scapegoat that Candace Owens would arrive at, even though she would never say it directly. And now she's essentially blaming Turning Point USA. And the more we look into it, the more we find more indicators. Like Charlie Kirk saying to Candace Owens, I'm pretty sure I'm like Moses. I'm not going to see the promised land. They're going to take me out. I've had a prophecy. So yeah, he's actually had prophecies about his impending death. Ribo Nation says, watching wrestling as a kid was our training for identifying fakery. Yeah, and do you remember as a kid how the believers in wrestling would get mad if you would tell them and they would want to hit you for real? Like, let me body slam you. Like, they would get really mad, they get hurt. So you didn't want to say anything because you didn't want to hurt their feelings because you were terrified of their emotional responses. That's the kind of intimidation that media believers use. They often use ridicule now, but oftentimes I do get stuff like, let's shoot you in the neck and see if it's fake. Or let's let you get punched in the face 23 times like Psycho Stu and see if your face breaks. And I'm like, I'm calling this thing fake. So you're saying you want to come over to my house and do it to me for real? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, okay, you're a mainstream media fundamentalist and you will commit acts of like holy war. Like, oh, I don't believe your religion, so you're going to come stone me. And they treat it that way. It's completely emotional. And I think that's part of, I think the explanation for their emotionality is that part of how they're sold into the story is their emotions catch them. So they're emotionally enraptured by the story. So you go in there to tell them it's fake, you tap that emotion. So if they were sad when they experienced the story and you call it fake, they cry. If they were enraged by the story, you tell them it's fake, they get enraged. I've done it. I've made people cry. Remember Craig from Fight the Flat Earth? I made him cry on a live stream when I said the Challenger explosion was fake. So he basically reverted back to that little child in school who watched the astronauts blowing up on TV. When I said the subway stabbing was fake, I had angry, indignant right-wingers essentially telling me that I was someone who deserved that to happen to me. Like, okay. But I'm not emotionally attached to any of this stuff. I'm completely dispassionate. I tend to view what we do here as a form of anthropology, and we're like aliens. So we're not getting into their belief systems, but we're looking at where these beliefs are being dumped. Like which demographic believes this, which demo believes this. And we can ascertain from that, we can predict how each side is going to respond to every single event. It's cookie cutter. It's templated. And again, any kind of templating, any predictability indicates it's probably staged. Because we're talking about pattern recognition here. And it's funny how pattern recognition is denigrated. It's like a mental illness, or it's your primate pattern recognizing brain running overboard, and you're just lost in these details that mean nothing. Like, they're so quick to say, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And I'm like, okay, we can debate them on whether entertainment and psyops are correlated by showing them every single instance of it. And we pile these up, and eventually they kind of quiet down. But it wasn't really until Erica Kirk that I think we put the nail in the coffin. I call it the Erica Kirk conundrum. The fact that Erica Kirk followed her corresponding entertainment character's entire trajectory from episode 1 to 4, following the next shooting of her husband, that alone tells you got a scripted world stage character mirroring a #1 Hulu release. You can't call that coincidence. But if you're not even willing to look at that, because you're a staunch media advocate and the TV would never lie, if that's your stance, well, you've also got to explain the drills. How often do we see drills that happen alongside fake events? Again, good example, London bombings, 9/11, 88 some drills. So the drills are a way for the PSYOP entertainment complex to create closed movie sets, to get those who aren't part of the Government Actors Guild, the GAGs, off the set. Controlled access. It explains a lot. But you couldn't say, oh, the drills that mirror the event are just coincidentally happening with that. And I've got a ton of examples. We have as many examples of drills, mass casualty simulations, as we do predictive and concurrent programming. So I kind of feel like between the event being lined up with drills and contemporaneous released entertainment, like at the same time, between that, yeah, the coincidence explanation doesn't have anything to stand on. So what we have is tons of empirical research, evidence supporting the premise here that staged media events occur regularly, they steer the dominant narrative, and they're planned in advance. So you already have to accept the premise that our future, that our history is being proactively created. The question is, how far back? I mean, the Hulu movie must have been completed at least a year ago. So at a very minimum, you would have to accept that the Charlie Kirk event was scheduled a year in advance. But if you look at the rest of the predictive content and all the common denominators between every instance, I'm talking the movies, the music videos, the podcasts, all these things reference the same talking points. Tyler as an executioner, neck wound, September 10th, the name Kirk, a storm. So you follow that back and you're like, well, these components that exist in each of these entertainment outlets can be traced back to the earliest example, Snake Eyes 98. So it's reasonable to deduce here that the CK event was scheduled 27 plus years ago, before the guy who played the role was selected to play the role. It was a LARP the entire time. I think the family is fake. I don't think that Erica Kirk even had those children. She's like driving and they have, it's so creepy, they're kids. It reminds me of that girl from the movie The Ring, where you never see her face because her hair is always over her face. You never see the children. You only see the backs of their heads. And I understand security and protecting their identities and stuff, but it just gets to be a little weird because the kids are always facing away, like it's normal. And so there's this new video where Erica Kirk is driving, the kid doesn't even appear to be in a car seat. And she's looking out the window and she's chanting, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I remember when I was 2, calling my father by his first and last name. Yeah, sure. It just all looks so manufactured and a lot of people are noticing. Another thing that flies in the face of this all being coincidence is how many of these various instances of this content we can point to was delivered by the principal actors themselves. They're actually involved in it. And how many times did Kirk foreshadow his own death? He had a little prophecy about it. Anyway, we've got a list a mile long for that particular event of hoax indicators. So again, if you're going to say it's real, I'm going to have to push it back on you and say, well, the burden of proof was never met by media, nor alternative media and their speculation. So if you're going to say it's real and you're going to put your intellectual integrity on the line here, address these hoax indicators. Check them off, box by box. Explain away. Why no crime scene tape? Why no EMTs? Why did they disturb the crime scene? What about the rapidity with which he was autopsied, funeral homed, and then put on display on 9/11? Like, there are so many questions that have been raised already, but no one has any way of explaining away the entertainment programming that relates specifically to the psychological operation in play. That again, that is proof positive that the thing was scheduled in advance. It was not spontaneous. But we got a long list, as we do for many events. And my point here is that we qualify our claims. If I say something's fake, I've got reasons. And I put my reasons out there to be refuted. And we spent a good 3 or 4 days straight debating with people claiming that anything happening in the entertainment can only be coincidence. And I'm happy for these debates because it led me to look closer and how can I better explain this? And I started diagramming these things on a timeline. And I started noting the common denominators with all the predictive programming and how it all trickled back to source. We can actually go back to the source material, the actual Psyops script. I mean, there is one. It's not a hypothetical. It's a known unknown. There is a script that was enacted on September 10th. You can't say that was all just improv. It's tightly scripted, like any mass casualty simulation or drill. So given that, we know there's a script, and whatever the script had on it, namely the elements that I listed before, were then passed on to various outlets to put into their content. So we're talking about the podcasts, the movies, the music videos, and who knows where else, how widespread it is. But the damning instances of entertainment programming that relate to the psyops, the stuff that you can't wave away with cherry picking, selectivity bias, Texas sharpshooter fallacy, which aren't really good arguments now. But the stuff that happens real time can't be ignored. And Erica Kirk's life right now fully contradicts that this is coincidental. So I'm really happy for this latest event because we can move on now. Now we can talk about finding the timelines associated with each event, the directors involved, and we can really get into the point of deconstructing these psyops completely. What's up, Psyops Sidecar? Thanks for joining. Linda Curtis says, CK was the youth's freedom tower. Yeah, there was a movie that came out this year called Americana or some show where some guy gets shot on the left side of the neck, just like Kirk, same spot. So the spot on the neck is something that I would contend is on the script that's about 30 years old. How many times did we see that specific spot on the neck targeted? I mean, you got Charlie, you've got Charlie Kirkland in Snake Eyes, and the actress from Snake Eyes was in Heads of State 2025 as VP Elizabeth Kirk, who gets the same wound. You have the Hulu show Tempest, September 10th. The Charlie Kirk character gets the wound in the same spot, as does his widow in A Dream. So there's 5. You have Ryan Routh trying to stab himself. He tried to Kirk himself in a courtroom and squib all over the place with a pencil. And if you look at the courtroom illustration, same spot in the neck. In addition to all the neck references. And then you have this weird thing with Alejandro Kirk, the baseball player, who they describe something about being a pain in the neck, and they show them dumping Gatorade on him and the liquid's like jutting out of the same part of the neck. Like, it's all getting really kind of immersive here and repetitive. But these repeated elements are what I'm referencing, like the storm or the date or the name Tyler, as being consistent all across the board. Just suggestive of a singular source. Jamarian May says, I should start a blues band that writes songs about psyops and reality manipulation called the Blues Benders. Well, I've been using the phrase history benders. And because what we're really talking about here are pre-scheduled, completely simulated events that become part of our shared history, our collectively agreed upon history. And it should be a scandal. I mean, this is a conspiracy that's successful. It works. It's an ongoing thing. It shows that entertainment is a part of government, that bread and circuses is a real thing. But the new development, and what I'm really focusing on here, is trying to ascertain how far in advance things are being planned. In the 1968 play Newsbenders, it was 5 years. 5 years in advance, they're writing the news. And what we're finding, and again, we're just looking at what is observable. This is just our research of media as it's being broadcast, and as the psyops come out, there's this relationship between entertainment and these events. So the entertainment stuff actually gives away how far back the source content would be for that fake event. So are you telling me that they're planning the news 30 years in advance? Yes. Maybe asking, may balk at that. But I would say, what's so difficult or controversial about saying the news is planned in advance 30 years when for any psyop to be performed successfully, it's got to be scheduled in advance? And if the end result of a psyop is fake news, and if fake news becomes fake history, then yes, we've already made the case that our history is being created proactively. We've already made the case. It's already true. We know it to be true. We can stand on that. We don't need a debate with people who are stuck in like 2002, still trying to process the eerie coincidences in the media as something that must be the result of a higher power than man. There's no intentionality in this. No, it's entirely intentional. Linda Curtis says, I'd say this whole government shutdown is planned way in advance, 42 lights out. Yeah, and the 42 million people having their EBT cards cut. Jamarian May says, I feel like we are in an Atlas Shrugged type of world with companies self-sabotaging for the planned reset. Yeah, didn't we have an Atlas comet like C19 before 2020? And now there's another Atlas thing. So if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, John Galt goes around recruiting CEOs, artists, anybody at the top tier of their field. He's like, hey, you're being taxed to death. Society's a parasite. Come to Atlantis. So he brings all these people to Atlantis under the conditions that they blow up and they destroy whatever they created. So it's not quite terrorism in the usual sense, but all these geniuses, magnates, all these successful people destroy their work so the masses can't have it because their political system, their socialism, is parasiting off of their work. That's the premise. And they all retreat into a place called Atlantis, where they have a perfect society, where they have the best art, the best music, the best food, the best everything, and everybody else has to suffer because they shut down society and they let the lights go out. And they vow that, okay, after society is finished consuming itself, then we will build on its ashes. So it's 100% a reset book. They Lie, We Speak says, Beak Speak's got many neat terms like News Testament. Yeah, when I talk about the church of media, it's a global church. It's supplanted all the other religions. And it's our primary source for worldview. And I look at it as analogous to the Bible. Like a holy book gives you a complete worldview. If you filter your entire worldview through the Quran or the Old Testament or the New Testament or Dianetics, you'll get a different outcome because your point of view matters. I mean, you can look at ChatGPT as an example or Wikipedia. Their point of view is mainstream. It's not inclusive of media fakery, news bending, history bending, or any of that. So you talk to somebody who has an off-world stage perspective and they're aware of these things, you're going to get a different output for whatever prompt you give them, whatever question you ask. So point of view is a key thing here. And our collective point of view is routed through the mainstream mediation, the news primarily, what we think of as news. But news and media, or in general, like entertainment media, it exists within an echo chamber. But there is this analogy here where you could look at history as the Old Testament. How we got here, even our cosmology, Big Bang, how we got here, evolution, history, to the point where it became modern media. So modern media is where history leaves off. And it's about the now, like the living Bible. It's about what's now and what's to come. And you read it today for guidance about the world today. There's this relationship with the New Testament that is fundamentally different than those who, than the Old Testament. And similarly, you got history and news. So I've been referring to the news as the News Testament. The News Testament, it is the appeal to authority that the believers refer to when they tell you that I have the truth, you don't. You're a heretic. You're an alternative media heathen. And when you look at how people process media, they process it as a belief system with pundits, with priests, with a great deal of faith. So in many ways, I would say that it is in fact a religion. It's a state, it's the religion, which is essentially the state church. So yes, News Testament. And I've gone through this analogy in Secret Religion of the Elite, where I go into detail about the various components of our modern worldview and how they're actually just reiterations, syncretic versions mixed with science fiction of older myths, like climate change and the flood that it's going to bring has a basis, if you look at the iconography, the symbolism, in Noah's flood. But instead of God getting mad at wickedness, it's Gaia getting mad at our carbon footprints. And who's there to constantly warn us about the floods? And nobody listens to them. And because of that, we're all going to be submerged, except for those who get in the space arcs. Noah. And Noah's symbol is the dove. You look at the bird over the water. It's a organization, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. So isn't it interesting that Noah is warning us of the flood? It has their weather satellite, like the angel warning Noah. And it also plays into this idea, of course, of wickedness and sin being redefined as the carbon footprint, or your pollution. Your pollution is like your sin. It angers Gaia. And it's also very partisan, and it follows along the same lines as the perspectives on the virus and the vax, which I would say virus is a new iteration of sin that divides society into the saved and the unsaved, the vaxxed and the unvaxxed. And you'll notice the unvaxxed are the same ones who don't mind their carbon footprint. And that's because the carbon footprint and the virus are new iterations of sin, whereas the right still adheres to the traditional versions of sin. Jamarin May says, any thoughts on those bizarre murals at the Denver airport? Yeah, the Denver airport's interesting. Isn't it the Illuminati headquarters? They play into it. And they've got that blue horse out front, Lucifer. Now, I don't know if Lucifer killed the maker, but the guy was here in New Mexico. He was a sculptor, and he died when one of his sculptures fell on him. I don't know if it was Lucifer that killed him. Dark Ghost Wind says, what do you think of germ theory? I don't know. I try to stray away from the popular debates that frame people into anti and pro. But what I am saying here is that we were introduced in 2020 to a construct that was religious, not scientific. And it was specifically designed to have the believers in the church of media, the saved, and then those who are anti-media, those who are opposing the mainstream version of events, could then be branded unsaved outside the church. And they created this perfect split down the middle, which we saw, where they want each side quarantining from the other. But it goes down the line, you see, because the traditional valued right and the progressive left are split down the middle, where the right wants to quarantine from the left because of sin, which the left doesn't really acknowledge. The left wants to quarantine from the right because of the virus, which the right doesn't acknowledge. And these are in broad terms, but you can see this division is pretty clear. And it's intentionally created. This is why the right wing responds to satanic panics like Pizzagate and moral panics, why they want to pull their kids out of public schools. It's all about quarantine, mutual quarantine. And we live in a perfect system. I think it's perfect what they've done. It's not like it's ever going to be reconciled or solved. This is the perpetual war. It's like a tug of war. Orwell wrote about it. And it maintains peace through war. War is peace. It's actually true. And I'm not convinced this is a bad thing. I'm really not. I'm really questioning whether this is just some sort of benevolent dictatorship, some kind of utopia, which is my conclusion based on the fact that they've switched from physical war to mind war. I mean, some people still fall for or still believe the premise set by media. I was listening to Calcified Lies, and he thinks Charlie Kirk was killed. And I don't have a problem with that. That's an interesting opinion. But I think that what we have as an advantage is that we've been looking at these things long enough to where we're not treating each one as a new thing, but a continuation of the same methodology. Like thinking that the next one is real, like maybe this shooting was real, because that used to be a talking point. Maybe it went real. Maybe it went kinetic. That's like saying, well, maybe the next rocket that Elon Musk sends to space or the next moon landing will be real. If the previous one wasn't real, the next one's not going to be real. The special effects might get better. They're not using rear screen projection anymore. They got augmented virtual reality on the space station, but it still rests upon an edifice of real, and there's no break from that. Like there's a continuity of fakery. And so you have to look at the big picture, not just the event in isolation, but what came before and the entire context, the enclosed media ecosystem. I call it the forest of fakery. The way that they gatekeep this information is you've got all kinds of truthers running around who are like, this event is fake, that event is fake. And they make these things their pet issues. But then they don't really connect the dots. Like I was really surprised when Wolfgang Helbig and also I think another one who, there are a few others that were involved with the whole Sandy Hook thing, like Jim Fetzer too, where both of them debunked this event to death. Like this whole school shooting is full of holes, it's all fake. And then Parkland comes along and they're both like, yeah, that was real. So what they do is they trick the truthers into thinking that some of the trees are fake. And these loudmouths with the megaphones and the big platforms with the red pills, they're going to tell you which ones are fake. And so they get you running around these fake trees trying to convince everybody that these trees are fake. Meanwhile, you're distracted from the fact that every single tree in the forest is fake. You're walking through a forest of fakery, but you don't recognize it as such because you've only noticed the big fake trees. It's a misdirection operation. They lie, we see, says Perma Saiwar. Yes. Lowry says, ever notice when the news organizations actually get to cover an actual real event that's unfolding that wasn't planned or scripted, they don't know what to do? Yeah, there's a qualitative difference. If it's a real event, it's like details are sparse. We don't know who did it. Killers on the loose. Unsolved. Like there was this murder of a tattoo artist downtown, vague story, no details. A year later, we find something about it. If it was a psyop, you would have had witnesses, laughing at the screen. You would have known who did it that day, and some politician would have come out with some bill, some gun ban or something. They would have solved the crime for you before the episode of the news was over. That's a reference to 12, Scooby-Doo Justice. So like real crimes don't get solved in one episode. A KJV WMB believer says, Helio Sorcery documentary discusses switcheroo method magician scheme too. Interesting. I'd like to know more about the switcheroo method. See, we are looking at a magic show. And the people who take it literally never get out of their seats. So they let the magician set their frame of reference. If they say, you sit here in front of the screen and you believe what we show you, believe your eyes, well, then you're going to be spellbound. You're going to fall for magic tricks. The way you get more information is you get out of that imposed point of view. You get out of your seat. You walk around the stage. You look backstage. You find out that, hey, that woman wasn't really cut in half. Nice. She's not really dead. So what we're talking about is we're non-believers because we have more information than the believers. So I don't think that you can make the case that a low information believer should be trusted over an informed disbeliever. And they're free to weigh their claims. Like, I'm going to weigh my feeling this was real against your claim it was fake. What additional information can you show me? And it's like, well, how much time do you have? Here's a list of things. And a major hoax indicator would be all of the popular truther channels pushing alternative explanations. They're pushing conspiracy theories about it. Because what the conspiracy theories do is they operate on the presumption it was real and that we're just debating who did it. So they're taking the ball past the goal. Like, yeah, he's dead. We've already concluded that. Now we can debate over who did it. But they never actually established that. So you'll notice, like I said with Candace Owens, she's got 33 different conspiracy theories over who did it, but none of these theories include the idea that maybe it didn't happen. And it's safe to say, it's reasonable now to say that she knows Kirk isn't dead. She's part of the operation. So her entire thing is an act. Spiraling out of control, talking about stabbing Sam Altman, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk to see if they bleed. Her believers, her conspiracy cult fans, making death threats against the enemies of Charlie Kirk. It's all theater. She's an actress and a propagandist. She's not an investigator. So you have all these people who think, well, the news media is not going to investigate it. So luckily, Ian Carroll and Candace Owens are going to investigate. They're investigating a crime, right? Like they're not like the police are or detectives, but they're doing it from the internet. They're investigating. They're going to find out for us. So you follow them so they can spoon feed you whatever they find. It's like, well, no, that's not what's happening. There's a predetermined set of narratives that they're going to dish out to you day by day. They're going to drag it out, and the entire time they're dragging it out, you're all just marinating in this storyline that it's real, but it's a mystery. And eventually they'll solve the mystery, like with JFK. But the mainstream will never acknowledge it, and it will maintain this split between mainstream and alternative. And the conspiracy theorists will feel vindicated because they know the mainstream's covering it up. So now they're the guys who are positioned to oppose them. This is how they engineered the whole conspiracy theorist culture. It's all inorganic. It is actually the controlled opposition. And so when you think about the term controlled opposition, it's not a handful of individuals. It's not content creators or influencers. No, it's the entire apparatus, including the subscribers, including the believers. Every person on Twitter mindlessly retweeting Candace Owens, they are controlled opposition. They're controlled opposition to the mainstream, as the mainstream is a controlled opposition to them. They're both controlled. And they're they're put into this dialectic by Big Brother who triangulates between the two sides. Our perspective, which includes history bending and media fakery, does not have a platform on the world stage. That's why what we're doing is important. And I say thanks again to all of you who support the channel and participate in this, because we are building out right now ground zero for a separate platform distinct from alt media and not defaulting back to the mainstream. Because you see some people do that. Like, if I can't prove this thing was a hoax, I'm going to trust the mainstream. So they're kind of stuck in this false duality where it's real or it's this particular conspiracy narrative, but they're kind of stuck. There has not really been a platform. And the reason we need a platform is that the more people with what I call the off-world stage perspective, the more efficient we get at deconstructing events. I mean, I already described the IPS think tank as a fake news wood chipper. And we're getting more methodical and nuanced as we go through this. This is a very serious thing we're doing. You could just describe this as an intellectual revolt in a lot of ways. And it needs a platform so that those who are part of it, those who have deprogrammed, who recognize the program, those who have stepped off of it into the off-world stage perspective, they need to become a self-aware demographic. We're not lining up behind shills. We're not lining up behind plants. We're not going to them because they're the alternative. We have to look at them as same team. You know, what's the difference when it comes to like looking at these media stories? They both agree on the big lie. Yeah, their opinions are different, but they agree on the big lie. So we do need a third branch of media. I call it off-world stage, and you can only get there by recognizing the world stage as such. If you don't recognize that you're within an optional model, then you're not deprogrammed. You're still in the Truman Show. And to be off the world stage is to recognize that the fake news accumulates and bends our history. So then you're in the recognition that the worldview that the consensus shares is subjective and it's not completely aligned with the real world. It has all kinds of augmentations. So if you don't have that awareness when you assess media, you can't claim to be off-world stage, nor can you claim to be deprogrammed. This includes voters. If you're still within the political horseshoe and you're voting for these puppets in the bread and circus show, I'm going to vote for that bread and circus clown. Well, then you're not deprogrammed. And it's no judgment. But what we're doing is we are a separatist movement for the off-world stagers. And you know who you are. If you're deprogrammed enough and you see these anomalies and you don't buy the misdirection, you know there's a deeper meaning to the alignment between entertainment and fake events, then you're going to find your way here. But we need to send out a bigger signal. Jamarian May says, Tim, the monkey narrative, breaking, truck hauling aggressive monkeys carrying hepatitis C, herpes, and COVID overturns in Mississippi. Yeah, it's almost like an annual thing. What's with all these monkey trucks overturning? And the last time I saw the monkey narrative, it was in the Superman movie where Lex Luthor, in a very Musk-esque capacity, has a parallel dimension where there's like 1 million monkeys on 1 million computers typing up hate speech 24/7. And this is following last year's breakdown of the symbolism of the monkey when they said the monkeypox was a global emergency. And on that day, Bad Monkey came out on Apple. We're talking about this period of time where the 80-foot tall statue of the monkey god's erected in Houston, and a video game called Black Myth comes out, where 1 million people are live playing the game Black Myth, where they are the monkey god. And we had about a dozen other instances of monkeys being pushed into the media, but rage monkeys, all correlating with 28 days later and the rage virus that came from monkeys who were exposed to violent media that turned them violent, and then it became a virus. And this all connects to the movie Civil War and the right wing and X, what I call disease X. Because the WHO had said for some time that the big one that shuts us down is disease X. We don't know what it's going to be yet. And I've been saying disease X is going to be the mind virus. And it's going to be unleashed on X. And it will be the basis for the internet equivalent of a lockdown, of a mind virus lockdown. Linda Curtis says, have they reached 100 monkeys yet? Yeah, that's right. Once 100, yeah, 100, every 100th monkey. What is the 100th monkey effect? Like, you teach a monkey how to wash mud off a potato, and then 100 monkeys away, another monkey is going to spontaneously know how to do it. And every 100th monkey is going to pick up the signal. And then it's going to become part of their culture. They're going to share it. Proof of collective consciousness and that we're in a simulation. Like the double slit experiment in Schrodinger's cat. These things are all cited by people who think we're in a simulation. And it's like, the 100th monkey syndrome was a myth. And the double slit experiment is not about a human observer turning a wave into a particle, but it's about the observer being the measuring device. It's just terminology. And Schrodinger's cat was always a joke, making fun of the idea of quantum physics. Like, oh, is the cat alive or dead? We won't know till we open the box. Yeah, that was always a joke. But it's funny how the anti-science people who reject the scientific method will appropriate quantum physics and advanced scientific terminology when it supports their side. All it really does is it provides enough woo and mysticism to slip in a faulty premise. And I do love the debates that we have because it gets, examining somebody's intentional intellectual dishonesty allows you to reverse engineer their arguments and find out, what tool are they employing. And one I came across recently is called the appeal to possibility fallacy, where someone had said to me repeatedly, okay, so you made the case, you think, that our history is being manufactured, and you're citing the relationship between fake events and entertainment. But I'm saying there's no intentionality there. Man couldn't do it. It has to be a sim. So we argue back and forth, and at the end of it, their argument was, well, you can't rule it out. It's possible it was all done by an egregore, by a simulation. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I can't rule it out. Why not? Like, who says? Well, that's the appeal to possibility fallacy, where somebody says, well, because it's possible, because it's conceivable, I have to be able to shoehorn this in as one of the potential explanations. And it's like, no, you actually can't. And when I'm talking about the scientific method, I'm really talking about, too, how you do have to acknowledge the better model. And if your model is flawed or doesn't work, you've got to throw it in the trash can. So when it comes to media, the model that you can trust the mainstream presumes that the media is running out there and recording the scene, taking interviews, and then sending info back to you for your edification. So they're just informing you. Well, that model is not really true because there's agenda. There's prefabricated stories, simulated events, Psyops. So that tells you that, no, that's not an effective model. We have to account for the fact that the media at times is proactively creating the news, not just reacting to it. So our model accounts for not only systemic fakery and proactive creation of stories, proactively simulating events, but also examining how this goes unchecked, uncorrected. And if you look back in time, even just recent history, 30, 40, 50 years, the pattern holds up. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that we live in a manipulated worldview and that media isn't exactly what it pretends to be at all times. It's a good liar, though. A good liar doesn't lie with every breath. A good liar lies strategically when they can get something from it And they lie to people who already trust them. And what we have with media, again, is occasionally they tell the truth. I mean, sometimes they report the sky is blue. They report the weather faithfully and traffic, local news. But the big events that get blasted across every single network globally that you can't hide from, these big events that have all the hoax indicators, yeah, those would be the lies. So we can unequivocally state here that media is a liar. So if your starting point is we should trust the liar unless the liar tells us it's lying, then you don't know what media is. And one other point where I think we've advanced a bit here in our understanding of how to approach this is we don't rely solely on the visual deconstruction. You'll see, like with this last event, the CK thing, a lot of people rely on video and slowing down the video, looking at clips where it gets to be opinion. Ah, this looks fake. That can't be real. Well, okay, these are opinions. And these opinions are subjective. And we're not going to be able to rely on that or anybody's supposed expertise on video analysis when the video gets better. Andrea says, couldn't someone easily say we're guilty of appeal to possibility and when we assert stuff too? Well, no, because we're pointing at evidence. So what I'm pointing out is the concurrent release content in entertainment and the predictive stuff. And also the fact here is that we predict this content. I said, if the Charlie Kirk thing is fake, it's going to have these hallmarks of fakery, including real-time content blasted across the streaming services that coincidentally mirrors it. So no, we're pointing at evidence. The appeal to possibility comes when somebody has no evidence for their side. So like, you can't rule out that Bigfoot did it. Well, yeah, I can. Like, is it possible? Well, I mean, I guess if Bigfoot's real, maybe. But that's not an argument in favor of it. So no, our analysis is based on observation, empirical research, and data points that you can't wave away, that we can actually address. And there has been no effective refutation to the analysis of media as a closed system, inclusive of all entertainment, all influencers, celebrities, and politicians. Like, it is a show. And there's a uniformity. There's a monolithic source of it all. There's an agreement, a big agreement globally. It's not like the left is saying, oh, those right-wingers faked that church shooting to turn the public against the left. Or the right never says, the left is faking shootings so they can take our guns. No, they're complicit in these things. Another reason why you have to look at this holistically and on a timeline is that if you look at any event in isolation, if you look at it as one fake tree and you don't see the forest, you're not going to arrive at the correct answer. So like, there are people on the left who are accurately pointing out that Trump put ketchup on his ear. It was all fake. So they're saying, yeah, the Trump thing was fake. But they still think the fireman was killed. I'm like, well, how do you reconcile that? So their perspective is blinkered by the assumption that the mainstream media is still at war with one another at the top, left and right. But no, for these fake events to go through and get a pass, there's unanimous agreement on the essential reality of these things. But no, I'm happy to hear any refutations to what we're pointing out. And I'm not going off of appeals to possibility. We're going off of empirical research. The appeal to possibility is a very desperate thing. Like, please take my pet theory that this stuff is all caused by vibes of the universe inspiring Hollywood directors. Like, no, I don't have to take that as a possible option. Another example of it would be you're camping in the woods with some friends and you all hear noises outside. And one of your friends says, I believe in Bigfoot. It was probably Bigfoot. It's like, well, Bigfoot isn't in the realm of possibility. It's a squirrel, it's a hunter, it's a deer. but you can't insert something into the realm of possibility that hasn't been established as real. Like, you have to really be strict on this. You can't let somebody's feelings or their intuition be included as equally valid. Like low information belief, low information disbelief, those are both worthless. You can be an informed disbeliever or have enough information to know it's true. I think being a believer in media is like being a believer in a church. At least with the church, you have a reason to be a believer because you're not relying on physical evidence because it's something supernatural or spiritual. But when it comes to media, their job is to gather information. They shouldn't leave you with a gap where you're obliged to be faithful and trust them, especially because we know they're liars. J5 says Bigfoot is Dracula. I haven't heard that. You know, the Church of the Subgenius, which is this UFO cult, they believe that they are descended from Yeti blood. They call themselves Yeti kin. They believe that Bigfoot or Yeti are interdimensional beings, superior to us. And they just fade in and out. So that's why they're always blurry in photos. All right, so let's move on. We were just going over the hoax indicators, and these are guidelines, but reality doesn't have this kind of predictability that we see with fake events. Reality does not find itself mirrored on Netflix or Hulu or the latest movie. No, fake events follow entertainment. It's not real life following entertainment. All right, so if you got the article, it's at ips.monster. I think it's important to kind of up our game here because we're making qualitatively different claims than anybody else. People in alt media don't go here. They don't go this deep. They'll say, maybe Charlie Kirk was squibbed, but they don't follow it up with 20 other questions. And I went through AI the other night, and I asked AI, based on these news stories, if this were fake and if he were using a squib, who would be in the know? Rule out plausible deniability, and who would necessarily have to know to pull this off. And it gave me a very interesting list, which is a great starting point for discussion. Like, if true, then what? If he's alive, then who else knows? But this is a can of worms that they can't touch because it's a slippery slope. If Kirk was squibbed, Trump knows about it. And he's not telling. Why is that? It's because they are the stars in the show. Bread and Circuses is a show. The show is history. Big Brother's story. And I think they love their roles in this. They're going to go down in history, the official version. Anybody who's in fake news gets put in history and designated as real. And those of us who are real won't exist. Our names aren't being carved into stone. You know, we're not going to be looked back on. They're not going to talk about us as participating in these turning points in history. We're not the movers and the shakers. But it's a monopoly. We're looking at an effective worldview monopoly. And isn't that the goal of every single religion? You get everybody to believe the same thing. Andrea says, I asked AI the same question about CK. Most people grossly overestimate how many need to know. Yeah, I first heard this terrible argument regarding the moon landing. Like, there's no way they could have faked the moon landing because there were 400,000 civilian contractors. Do you think 400,000 people could keep a secret? It's too big of a secret to keep. I saw something on Fox. They were talking about 9/11, and it was some 9/11 truther. And he's like, yeah, I think it was an inside job. And the host is like, how many people would need to know to keep it a secret? And that's not really a valid argument because they're not including compartmentalization. And for me, this was an easy one to grasp because I was in the military and I was attached to a unit that was doing air defense artillery, and I knew nothing about it. I wasn't allowed in certain areas. I couldn't talk to certain soldiers when we were in the field. I couldn't go into their vehicles. I couldn't look at their equipment. Like, it was a closed, it was basically security clearance society. If you don't have a certain security clearance, you don't find out certain things. So there's a hierarchy, there's a pyramid. The people at the top, yeah, exactly, Obrick. The janitor at NASA knows the same as the director. Imagine like any Hollywood movie. Do you think that craft services know what's going to happen at the resolution of the movie when the hero and the bad guy get into a confrontation? No, like, these are closed sets. It's a need to know basis. So you can rule out that talking point that everybody would need to know. You can rule in, though, who would specifically know. And that's what I'm more interested in. Like, who would have to know this was fake? And you get a list. Then you get a list of directors, writers, artists, musicians whose artwork, whose content added to the Psyop, whether it's predictive or concurrent reinforcement content. So then you can see who is involved in what I term the Psyop entertainment complex. And the more we go through these history benders, when I start doing these erase, I have this dry erase board here. We're going to whiteboard it. And it's getting to be really interesting because I've been doing some drafts on this. It's part of a bigger project, history benders. But what I'm arriving at here is that we're getting a pretty good idea on how far in advance each particular Psyop was scheduled and how this affects how much predictive content there is for it, how widespread it is, and then how often the same names show up again and again. And then you're finding certain movies contain elements of multiple fake events built into it. So what we're really looking at here is not difficult to explain. The phenomenon of predictive programming is not a mystery to us. It's still a mystery in Trutherville. They have no clue. I was trying to explain to one big channel who only focused on Snake Eyes. I was like, okay, forget Snake Eyes for a minute. Look at Hulu's The Tempest. And instead of talking about it and sharing the content like they did Snake Eyes, he said, mind blown. The fabric of reality has been ripped apart. It's like, my mind is not blown. Like, I'm not confused. I'm not shocked. It's predictable for us at this point, but we're the only ones who aren't confused. And I don't think there's any excuse to be confused. Like, I don't think that's a valid position to take. Like, I don't know if he's dead or alive. Oh, just say you're confused. But don't consider your confusion an equal perspective to ours. Informed disbelief and confusion are not equal. If you're confused, it's because you didn't do due diligence. Or if you're confused, it's because your point of view doesn't allow you to include media fakery in your analysis. So it all comes down to your point of view. What is your point of view? Frank Castle says, do you think the premise of anything is possible is a prerequisite? No, not anything is possible. That's not really true. And the general explanations for what we're describing are purposefully there to muddy the waters because they don't want us to be able to see the big conspiracy. We're not supposed to see the world stage. We're supposed to be in it. The perspective of the off-world stage, the deprogrammed, isn't supposed to exist unless you have security clearances, unless you've been let in on it. So society is divided into the programmed, who are all misinformed, who are living along with the program and the fake history, not knowing about it. That's everybody. The programmers are a very small group compared to the masses. And I doubt very much that the programmers are let out of the box very much. It's not like they're let out of it. This is the Truman Show. Everything's manipulated. I don't think so. They don't have any whistleblowers for a reason. I would suggest that the people who are involved in media fakery are involved in very specialized areas. It's super compartmentalized. We are decompartmentalized because unlike the programmers and the programmed, we have a perspective that is inclusive of both and doesn't have any barriers. Like, we're not only in or aware of fake terrorism or fake shootings. We're aware of the entire array of fake events and the long-term agenda inherent within it. And this is all out of the IPS think tank. There's no conspiracy theory channel out there that talks about our fake history being created proactively, but all the popular ones are talking about how our history in the past is really fake. There was a mud flood, there was Tartarians, there's a buried civilization. They'll talk about the past authoritatively. Like, 500 years ago, this was true. 1,000 years ago, this was true. Or this is the real version of what happened 200 years ago. So they have their heads in the mud, but they're not recognizing that at some point, news becomes history. When do you think that is? Like, put a date on it. When does news become history? After 30 years? 40 years? 50 years? No, yesterday's news is history. It's not like the media ever goes back and says, we got this wrong, or this was fake. They're never going to self-correct. What's up, Jennifer Reeves? Flozik, thanks for joining. We got about 62 people in here. We're going to ramp this up. I'm going to get into an office, set up the 24/7 stream. We're going to get into a firm schedule and have a lot of free time now. And we're going to aim to increase the size of the think tank because the objective here is to form the core of this third branch of media, this off-world stage perspective, enlarge it, and then let it do its work. And what I mean by this is there is no pushback. There's no concerted pushback against any of the propagandists in alternative media. We don't have the numbers to do it right now, but we will. And they don't have any kind of refutation or defense. We're going to see it. It's going to be pretty clear. We've been confronting a lot of the guardrails. Like, what keeps people from the off-world stage perspective? What keeps them in the Truman Show? Well, primarily it's the guardrail that is covered in fake blood. If you're not willing to recognize atrocity propaganda, that it's a magic show, not a snuff show or a snuff film, if you don't know that they don't kill people in Psyops, then you're going to remain in their informational system. You're still in their container. You have to jump the bloody guardrail. And a lot of people can't do that. I call them death clingers, corpse clutchers, like 9/11 jumpers. I used to debate these people. They're like, okay, I grant you that there was no planes and that no one died at the Pentagon, but there had to have been some jumpers. I'm like, why? Well, there's just so many people that couldn't have emptied it out. So I'm like, well, what about the drills? There were 88 drills that day, mass casualty simulations about planes hitting buildings. Don't you think they had the closed movie sets? They had the capability. But we really had to push on it to get people to recognize that nobody's dying at these events. Anybody pushing against the nobody died point that we make have unfairly accepted the burden of proof. It's like, you guys are just covered in theatrical blood and you're crisis acting. Now, others are stuck behind other guardrails. The ego is a big one, because you have to recognize that if you're a conspiracy theorist, a career conspiracy theorist, if you've been selling conspiracies for years, you're going to have to recognize that you were lost in the forest of fakery. You'll have to recognize that, I was wrong about chemtrails and 5G. I was wrong. All the fear porn is wrong. I was wrong about Q. I was wrong that people died. Wrong, this was a false flag. And a lot of people aren't going to be willing to admit that they were wrong. I think a lot of people who attach their entire persona, their life, to the idea that we live in the matrix or simulation, they're never going to exit the world stage. Yeah, Sam, they're just as delusional as religious fanatics. To me, though, I think you should be able to take it. Take the L. We all realized that we were deceived and lied to by every mainstream premise, and we rejected that. Just to go into Trutherville, you got to jump over your ego barrier and say, okay, I was wrong. I was fooled. I was a dupe. So what's the difference between doing it again? You're just switching from becoming a believer, a passive recipient of propaganda from your chosen source, and you're becoming a knower, an understander. The problem with being a believer is that there are so many false explanations to believe in that it de-incentivizes seeking better answers, which is where we're at. We're fomenting a culture of disbelief. We're non-believers. And you'll notice the believers are pretty hostile to us. They want nothing to do with us. And it's because we're undermining everything that they stand on. Like if you stand on mainstream, of course you're going to hate the conspiracy theorists. Ironically, the conspiracy theorists are challenged by us, the media skeptics, the auto hoaxers. They look at us as like tinfoil hatters. Like we're the conspiracy theorists to the alt media. They've always shunned auto hoaxers. That's why we took the term. You can't call things fake. You're an auto hoaxer. Well, everything's been fake thus far. Looks fake, seems fake. Let's approach it with that as a possibility. Like, get the auto hoaxers out of here. But yes, mainstream media advocates are delusional religious fanatics and propaganda mules, easily distracted, forever chasing the new shiny object, the current thing, content with a steady diet of breadcrumbs, and they're led down well-paved rabbit trails by obvious shills, and they think they're discovering new information. Like, I'm sorry, but if you're a truther, you're not cutting edge. If you're still a month into this Charlie Kirk thing and you're undecided as to whether you think it was real or fake, you're lost in the fog of Psywar. We knew it was what it was day one, or what it was likely day one, but we suspended judgment for a few days until we could gather some more facts. I conceded immediately that it looked real. Dark Ghost Wind says, people really hate the idea you say something's fake. They immediately accuse you of calling everything fake. It's not my fault. They keep staging these events. Yeah, if somebody says you call everything fake, you have to say, well, we qualify it. We have hoax indicators. We have criteria. But you, on the other hand, assume everything's real, which is just as bad as saying everything's fake. Because you're talking about low information takes. Everything's real, low information. Everything's fake, low information. But yeah, the people who hate the idea that we call things fake are generally low information. But we're at a point now where we can challenge them. And I'm confident now to stand on my premise here that our history is being manufactured decades in advance. Not literally everything, but if you look at how it works, a good lie allows somebody to get a pass on something. It's like a strategic step forward. Well, a good psyop takes the news cycle and everything bounces off of it, reinforces the assumed reality of it. So the fake event contaminates the entire pool of information. The fake dominates the real. So a monthly psyop, and these psyops all build on one another. They advance agendas based on these. They do influence the course of human events as defined by the mass media history-making monopoly. What's up, Mom with Sons? Thanks for joining. So we're just talking about the newest article, Hoax Indicators and the Informed Disbeliever. If you're on my blog, you would have received that. We're going to continue to develop the whiteboard series, History Benders. I'm outlining a few of these, and I want to do them in a more formal setting, but I'm just doing these rough draft videos, you could say. A lot of it's to put it out there for you, to add what you know, and to add your own commentary, and we'll build on it. But look, mass media has long since lost its benefit of the doubt. And with AI advancing as rapidly as it is, we're reaching a new level of what I consider to be illiteracy. Like, I'm talking visually illiterate. The masses can no longer trust themselves to know real from fake. This is an engineered attack on our cognition, where we're going to be left at the mercy of the interpreters, of the priesthood. Oh, this is designated real. This is designated fake. And it's only going to get more difficult to discern, which is why I said we have to embrace the approach of the blindfolded skeptic. The blindfolded skeptic is one who approaches these things with no reliance on the visuals, with the assumption that the visual stuff is going to look real. So if it looks real, what can you go off of? Context, hoax indicators. Go through every hoax indicator on any event. Just have somebody read them to you. And without looking at the event, you should be able to reasonably ascertain whether it was staged or not. Dr. Back afterwards says, I want to see if these crisis actors get some principles and blow the whistle on the fakery. I don't think so. Like, why would an undercover agent blow their own cover? Why would a person who's inserted into society with a fake persona ruin their own gig? These are good jobs, well compensated. There's so many sellouts among us, and I don't think they're difficult to find. I mean, we've seen this ourselves. The IPS think tank, we ran in circles in the first couple of years with a lot of people who had big channels who all happened to be offenders. They all happened to be pervs on parole. And these pervs on parole were put out there as propagandists to push alternative media narratives. And they were the ones who were interviewed by big media outlets and putting out these talking points. And that's when I realized that there's a lot of compromised people out there. Not this Epstein Island fiction, but just regular people who've done terrible things, who are smart enough to be useful to the system and compromised enough to be used as informants. And as such, they are doing all kinds of work. You know how many informants and contractors are on Discord working for feds to try to influence our opinions? They're everywhere. Dark Ghost Wind says, the term woke, funnily enough, is rooted in occultism. Woke is in awake, false awakening. The red pill, blue pill are the two pillars. We're at the point where people ignore the signposts. Yeah, I agree with that. People are like, when did you wake up? Or Alex Jones woke me up. And they talk about it like they're awake. I'm like, what do you mean you're awake? So we're asleep, therefore, right? It's a false dichotomy. And the truth of it is, the woke, whether it's woke left or woke right or red pill woke, all of the wokes exist in a subset of the mainstream paradigm. So what that means is they're in a deeper level of programming. Like, I would say the blue pill puts you to sleep, you're dreaming. The red pill turns your dream into a nightmare with a million things to be afraid of. You're in the end times now. Wokeism in general does that. Sense of urgency, that's why they're always shrill, that's why they're activists, because they feel like they have to save mankind from this oppressor. But the woke perspectives exist on the world stage within a subset of the mainstream. So it's, in fact, a deeper level of programming. So they're actually deeper in slumber, further from being awake. The only people who can claim to be awake are those who are cognizant of the program itself, the meta script, media fakery, and the long-term effects, who are no longer affected by the dream world of mass media, psychological warfare. So I would say that, yeah, we are the only ones who could claim to have any kind of relative, quote, wokeness, but like everything, they appropriate terms. and they generally mean the opposite. But the off-world stage perspective is the point of view that I'm advocating for, and it really does establish that there is a point of view that doesn't accept the, quote, world stage as a valid model. I would liken the world stage to Plato's cave. That if you look at it as it's an analogous construct, but we live in a literal Plato's cave. And you notice the people who get mad at you when you call it fake? Yeah, those are the people who looked at the people who came back from exiting the cave and thought they were crazy. Armin Ra says, MSM goes to heaven, MSM plus goes to hell, MSM minus goes to reality. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, so MSM, mainstream mediation, is just the default perspective. The woke stuff is the plus, the conspiracies, the additional stuff, deeper in the programming. Our perspective is called subtractive. We subtract from the mainstream what cannot be verified. So I say MSM minus. So our perspective is MSM minus. And you can tell by someone's opinions if they're MSM or MSM plus. The people who don't know if it's real or fake are MSM plus. They're still on the world stage. They're 1 foot on, 1 foot off. Like, I don't know if it's real or if it's fake. Okay, so you're just saying that your mind is impotent, that you're incapable of knowing. And that's a place where they want you. They want you in the fog of Psywar. They want you confused. And I'm saying that's not a valid position. Saying that you don't know doesn't mean you're open-minded when the information is there for you to know. It's practically an appeal to ignorance. Like, I don't know, so it's not known. No, it is known. We are addressing known unknowns. We're not chasing some conspiracy rabbit trail. We're actually examining the architecture of media and arriving at a conclusion as to what it is and what its purpose is. And it's not what people think. Dark Ghost Wind says, so much of the terminology and memes are rooted in this weird occult Kabbalistic nonsense for people to obsess over. It seems to go over the heads of the truthers. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that the Trutherville is either Christian, like these self-styled Christians, which are a big part of the truther community, but then those who aren't Christian veer into the more New Age Gnostic stuff, and they embrace it without even recognizing it as such. But it's all a syncretic religion. I mean, mainstream is a religion. Mainstream mediation, the media is a church. It is a state church. And so the alternative is no less of a religion. It's like the mainstream is the Catholic to the alternative, which is the Protestant. Like they both work out of the same book, but one doesn't recognize the authority of the institutions. Layla Schmidt says, I was born awake. It's all just children playing on the playground of Earth. We're all playing our own games. Life is a playground. Could be. It could also be some kind of hellscape controlled by archons. I don't know. I get the idea, though, that you're right about this. Like, you can intuitively grasp it, and you could be, quote, awake at the level, I think, spiritually awake, without necessarily understanding the media fakery. And I get that. I don't dispute it. Like, you don't have to know the news is fake. It could just not be relevant to your life. You could just recognize it as a product of the world deceptions and just dismiss it altogether if you chose to. That's how I used to live. Before I ever looked at fake news, I was already looking at synchronicity and events in my life that seemed to suggest a cybernetic feedback loop between my consciousness and my experiences, to where I was saying, okay, mainstream science does not explain my experiences. So the model I've been given is false. So it's not about shape. It's not about NASA and shape of the world. It's about what this place actually is. And I don't think you can limit your definition to, yeah, it's a big rock falling through space. Like there's more nuance to it. There's something about us and our relationship with it that needs to be included in our model. Unless your model is going to be reductionist and it's only going to assume that we're evolved apes with big egos contemplating the meaninglessness of the universe and coping by trying to invent meaning where there is none. But I have this theory that the universe is made of meaning. It's made of information. And it's perceived into existence, more or less, from our perspective. There's some kind of a special place we have in the grand scheme of things. Is it a game? I'm more manichaeistic. I think it's more of a war. Just like there's a media war for the control of our minds, I think there's a bigger war for the control of our souls. And I think most people are in the gray. They're not really on a side. But I think at the vanguard of each, you've got those who are operating from a place of light and those who are operating from the purely material side. And I think there's this constant struggle between the two. And I don't think it ever ends. And that's just my opinion, but that's just from my own experiences. I'm not saying it's absolutely true, but that's the feeling that I get. And when people say God, I'm always like, which God are you talking about? Because there are some days where I wonder if the various gods of mainstream religion are just syncretic Frankenstein creations by the state to get people to obey government. Like maybe the gods of the various religions are all just man-made constructs and have nothing to do with the source of everything, which is a very Gnostic way of looking at things. But I think it's likely. I think it's likely. I don't trust any of these institutions to be just pure and here for our benefit. But I like a lot of the biblical imagery and the myths and these ways to try to explain things. I think there's a lot of value in it from all different religious thought and philosophy. I think there's something to it. Lately, I've been really obsessed with Thelema and these modern Gnostic ideas about how we're not psychically integrated if we're operating solely from the ego, which is mostly a byproduct of the body, but that there's a transcendental part of us that has a awareness that isn't constrained by a earthly ego, but that yet is still part of us, just like your subconscious. And that there's a discipline or a process by which somebody over the course of their life can integrate. And I've had enough experiences, precognition, telepathy, synchronicity, intuition, intuitive insights that I used to think were the result of something external, God, the universe, angels, or something. But in the last few years, I've really come to see that these are actually just aspects of the human mind that have always been externalized by the authorities, so we don't integrate it. Like if you think you're hearing God and you're experiencing miracles, the last thing the power structure is going to want is for you to think that you're the source of it. No, they want you to go run to one of their churches so they can spiritually neuter you before you do something with it. Dark Ghost Wind says, the scripters have mastered this art. The stories are designed to be consumed within a day, forgotten in a week, and yet the message sticks in our subconscious. Well, Lean Dion pointed something out like a week ago, that there are so many fake events happening that it's going to become increasingly easier to expose the concurrent programming. Like it's going to give away itself. We're looking at the underpinnings of fake events, and the more fake events there are, the more of a case we build up. All right, my phone's about to die. We've been live here for 104 minutes. Thank you all for joining. Subscribe at ips.monster. My objective is to get us into a studio within a month so we can get the 24/7 stream up and do nightly 3-hour call-in shows, which should be very productive. And when we do, we'll have a new body of content, including all this new history-bending stuff. All right, have a great evening.